3 days before Christmas, I woke up with the kind of hollow ache I hadn't felt since my father's funeral. No scent of pine, no warmth of cinnamon rolls, no voices in the hallway. Just silence. My parents were gone. First mom in June, then dad in September, like he couldn't bear the thought of her being cold alone in that plot behind St. Augustine's. It was supposed to be the first holiday I did nothing. No schedule, no reports, no meetings. I retired in March. 40 years of audits, compliance, internal reviews, done. I told everyone I wanted peace this year. But peace, it turns out, is a thin blanket in a cold house. I went to the study to grab some old boxes. Thought I'd maybe pull out the model train set for the grandkids. That's when I found it. A notepad wedged in the back of the drawer. The one with the maroon full leather cover she hated. Looks like something your mother would have kept, she once said. I opened it without thinking. Page 1. Why do you always breathe like that? Page 3. Can't you wear something other than those sad beige sweaters? Page 6. Oh, Jake, no one cares what you did at the firm. There were 57 of them. I counted. It wasn't the words. It was how she said them. When? In front of our friends. At our daughter's birthday. At Thanksgiving with her boss sitting across the table, laughing along. That's what got me. The way she chipped away at me in public while wrapping her arm around someone else in private. I never accused her. Not outright. But I listened. I noticed. And I documented. I was an auditor, after all. I sat with that list for maybe 20 minutes. Just reading. No rage. No grief. Just recalibration. Like a machine booting up after a long freeze. And somewhere in the middle of page 32. Jake, don't talk about retirement. It's depressing. I decided to go home a day early. They didn't know I was coming. Now, before I go on, let me say something. If you're still listening right now, and this sounds like something out of a slow burn disaster, you're not wrong. But trust me, it explodes. And if you appreciate stories that burn slow, then detonate. Do one thing for me. Hit that subscribe button. You'd be shocked how many people listen without following, and honestly, every click tells the team that this madness is worth building. Thank you. Now back to the list. I wasn't going to tell her I found it. I didn't need to. See, I had already started preparing long before today. I just hadn't decided what to do with all the pieces I'd collected. My version of revenge wasn't rage or screaming. It was arithmetic, quiet, precise, and built with the patience of a man who spent 4 decades finding holes in systems designed to deceive. She thought I was checked out. That's the thing about emotional cruelty. Once they think you're numb, they assume you're blind. But I wasn't blind. I noticed the credit card statement where the hotel charge was double what a single night cost. I noticed the duplicate Uber receipts. I noticed her boss laughing a little too hard at her jokes at last year's company party, while she looked at me like I was a potted plant someone forgot to water. And so the list grew. From little remarks, to patterns, to confirmation. But it was always for me. Never court. Never confrontation. Just in case I needed a reminder of who I'd become in her story. The relic. The beige sweater. The old man with nothing left to offer but a pension and a quiet seat at the holiday table. Until I found that list again. That list that began as therapy and ended as fuel. I packed my bags that morning. Not like I was leaving, like I was arriving. With intent. With documentation. With 3 sealed envelopes and 1 notarized signature that had been waiting in my briefcase for exactly 46 days. She just didn't know the clock had been ticking. The house was a 6-hour drive. I didn't play music. Didn't call anyone. I passed the time reciting numbers in my head. The date we met. The account number of the trust fund. The clause about non-spousal beneficiaries. The exact timestamp of a security footage clip she didn't know I'd seen. Numbers are honest. They don't lie when the world starts spinning. It was evening when I pulled into the driveway. Her car was there. So was our daughter's. And someone else's, black Mercedes GLS, license plate from out of state. The same one I'd seen in 2 traffic cam screenshots near the Four Seasons. The porch light was on. Music spilled faintly through the windows. Laughter. Glasses clinking. The scent of roasted ham. Her specialty. Honey glaze. Extra time. They were having a holiday gathering. Without me. And yet, they knew I was coming. Or rather, they thought they'd be the ones surprising me. The first thing I noticed wasn't the cars. It was the placement of the cars. No one parks directly behind the garage unless they're staying. There were 7 total. My daughter's sedan. My sister-in-law's ridiculous lime green SUV. The black GLS again, same plates. But the others, those were new. Rented, probably. Maybe for the optics. I got out, holding the bag of gifts I'd wrapped in silence 2 nights ago. Matching pajamas for everyone. Even had names embroidered. I thought it might be a small comfort. One last attempt at playing the part. The patriarch. The warm grandfather with warm cocoa and even warmer blind spots. The idea now made me feel sick. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see figures moving inside. At first, I thought it was some kind of neighborhood gathering. Maybe carolers? Then I saw the folders. The wine glasses were half full but untouched. The tension in that room had a posture. Something staged. I opened the door and stepped in. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. My wife turned to me, standing near the fireplace like a well-dressed realtor showing off a foreclosure. Burgundy dress. Perfect curls. Too perfect. Not the usual messy hair tied up with one of our daughter's old scrunchies. No, this was intentional. Orchestrated. Her boss was next to her. Alan. Greasy hands folded politely, the way a man does when he's not sure which persona to wear. He smiled like he knew something. I smiled back, the way auditors do, measured and laced with things unsaid. Our daughter was halfway down the stairs, eyes wide, trembling. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be at her friend's in Vermont until the 24th. She clutched the banister like it was the only stable thing in the house. And then came the voice. "Oh, Jake, you're just in time to sign." My wife's tone could have cut tile. Too loud, too cheerful, too fake. Like a schoolteacher pretending a fire drill isn't a fire. She stepped toward me with a stack of crisp papers in her hand, smooth, white, comb-bound like it had been freshly printed at the firm. Her lawyer, Gregson, hovered near the dining table. Our lawyer, Sharp, stood in the corner looking like he'd just lost a chess match he didn't realize he was playing. "Sign?" I asked. She smiled like it was her birthday, and someone brought her the wrong cake. "Yes, well, we thought, with everything going on and the holidays, maybe it's best to finalize the split before things get complicated." Complicated, I repeated, setting down the gift bag on the foyer table. Gregson stepped forward, holding out a pen. "We've reviewed the terms. Everything's been cleared. Nothing unexpected." I looked at Sharp, who avoided my gaze entirely. That told me everything I needed to know. They'd turned him, or at least confused him. Either way, he wouldn't be defending me in this room. Not now. My sister-in-law, Claire, stood in the hallway holding a tablet, smirking like she'd finally won some petty family feud from a decade ago. Her arms were crossed tightly, hiding the little tremor in her fingers. "I see those things." I cataloged them. She was nervous. That amused me. My daughter stepped down slowly. I met her eyes. I thought. "Mom said you weren't coming," she whispered, voice cracking. "Change of plans," I said softly. Then, to the room. "No one's going to offer me a drink." Alan chuckled. "Let's get through the formalities first, yeah? Then we can toast. Clean break, fresh start. All that good stuff." His smile lingered too long on my wife. Not subtle. Not necessary. I took the pen. Held it. Turned to my wife. "You always did hate surprises," I said. She blinked. "Excuse me." I clicked the pen open. "Well, you'll love this one." And signed. Not the documents in her hand, of course. The version I'd brought with me. A version they hadn't seen. Yet. The room shifted. I watched the weight of confusion begin to crack through the smugness on Alan's face. Gregson cleared his throat like something had just gone wrong with his afternoon. Claire squinted at the signature page like she suddenly remembered a detail she forgot to check. I handed the pen back to no one in particular. Then I turned, opened my briefcase, and removed a neatly bound folder of my own, signed, dated, and notarized over a month ago. I placed it gently on the table in front of my wife. "Final version," I said. Her face twitched. This isn't the same." "No," I replied. "This one's legal." She looked at Alan. He looked at Gregson. Gregson looked like he needed to sit down. And I smiled, warm as a fireplace full of old photographs. The kind that burns slow. The air in that room changed the second I unlatched the briefcase. You know that sound? A soft click, metal meeting leather? In that moment, it echoed louder than the fireplace crackling behind them. Everyone went quiet. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't even frowning. That's the thing about quiet men. No one notices when they pick up the matches. They only panic when they smell the smoke. I reached in and pulled out a navy blue binder. Thicker than the document my wife was holding, but sleeker. One of those custom-bound legal folders from Whitmore and Firth, my old firm's preferred trust litigation consultants. When I set it on the table, the embossed seal glinted in the light. Silver, not gold. Alan squinted at it like it was written in a language he didn't understand. Claire, still smirking, leaned in like she expected a typo. My wife's smile faltered for the first time. "This isn't the version we discussed," she said, tone tight, but trying to stay calm. I didn't answer, just turned the folder toward her and flipped to the signature page. My name, her name, the witness, the seal. Dated. Stamped. Filed. This was notarized over a month ago, Gregson said slowly. How is that possible? I looked at him like a disappointed teacher. Because your client doesn't read footnotes, or trust disclosure schedules, or amendment deadlines. But I do. My wife stepped back slightly, like someone feeling the first tremor before the quake. Jake, this isn't the right one. This isn't. This doesn't include the revised distribution percentages. No, I said, carefully folding her version shut. Because those were never legally binding. We never signed that version. This one, however, has my signature. Yours. And the clause referencing the irrevocable premarital trust? That was inserted under Article 3. 4 months ago. Gregson looked down at his own copy and paled. Claire leaned forward. Wait, what trust? I met her eyes. The one that pays the mortgage on the lake house you and your husband have been living in since April. The one I told my accountant to freeze last week. But please, keep the kitchen towels. They were a wedding gift. Her jaw tensed. Alan cleared his throat. Jake, look. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding. I turned to him, slowly, and I smiled. Alan, you authorized an internal asset transfer from your corporate card to cover 3 client dinners with my wife at the Carmine Suites downtown. I have the receipts, the security timestamps, and the reservation confirmations, all under your name. You want to talk misunderstanding? Let's start there. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish realizing the hooks already lodged deep in its throat. My wife tried again, this time reaching for a glass of wine like it would steady her. This is insane. You're twisting things. I didn't even know that version existed. No, I said, my voice still calm. You just assumed I wasn't paying attention. Sharp finally spoke from the corner. Jake, I wasn't informed of this submission. If you had, I cut him off without raising my voice. Sharp, I retained secondary counsel months ago. You were always a courtesy, a formality for appearance's sake. Your role in this room is finished. You can leave your invoice with my assistant. His face flushed. He gathered his things in silence. Gregson stood, trying to salvage dignity. I'd advise we take a short recess. There seems to be some confusion. There's no confusion, I said, rising from my seat and placing my hand flat on the signed version. This document is already filed. The financials have already been restructured. And the board at Alan's company received the compliance logs this morning. My wife's wine glass shook slightly. What logs? She asked. You'll see. Claire looked between them and me like she'd walked into the wrong movie. The best part? No one was yelling. No one slammed a door. They didn't have to. The silence itself was louder than any explosion. That's the thing with well-planned moves. There's no need to scream when you're already 10 steps ahead. I collected the gift bag I'd left in the foyer and walked it back into the living room, setting it on the floor near the couch. One by one, I pulled out the embroidered pajama sets. My daughter's name. Mine. Even one for the dog. None for my wife. Not anymore. Alan waited until the room's attention had shifted, Gregson muttering legal jargon into his phone, my wife pacing like the floor might rearrange itself under her feet, Claire whispering furiously to Sharp, who now looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Our daughter had disappeared upstairs again. I assumed to cry or scream into a pillow, which, frankly, made her the most emotionally honest person in the room. That's when Alan stepped forward. A calculated lean in, elbows tucked, voice low, trying to reclaim control. Jake, he said, wearing that mask of patient diplomacy I'd seen him use at our last HOA meeting when a neighbor accused him of having an unauthorized hot tub. Maybe we should step into the study. Talk this through like adults. No need to make this more public than it has to be. I looked at the man who, 2 years earlier, had sent me a Christmas card signed only from all of us at Capital Point. No name, no warmth, just branding. Public, I repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Is that your concern here, Alan? He gestured subtly toward the others. Look, it's obvious there's been a communication breakdown. But we're reasonable men. We can align our priorities. Oh, align our priorities. That's corporate speak for, let's bury whatever you know before it buries me. I reached down into my briefcase again, this time retrieving a much smaller item. Neatly wrapped in matte black paper, no ribbon. Simple. Surgical. I handed it to him. He hesitated. What's this? A gift, I said. One you'll want to open before you speak another word. He peeled the wrapping slowly, perhaps expecting a pen or a watch. Inside was a small black velvet box, the kind you'd expect to hold cufflinks. But instead, nestled in foam, 2 flash drives. One red, one silver, each labeled with a white tag in all caps. The red one, audit trail. The silver one, compliance logs. His smile faltered, but didn't fall. Jake, you'll want to review them both thoroughly, I said. Start with the red one. It contains transaction records dating back 18 months. Corporate reimbursements miscategorized as client development. Mostly dinners. A few hotel suites. One oddly generous wellness spa entry that your internal team approved on a Sunday. I don't, he began. You don't remember authorizing them. I know, I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice to match his. But you did. Or at least, your login credentials did. That's where the silver drive comes in. His throat bobbed. Compliance logs? He asked. Keycard entries. IP logins. Voice memos from your assistant. She has an oddly good memory. Internal calendar screenshots. You know, standard cross-reference material. Now he looked down at the drives like they might bite. Jake, he said quietly, why would you have these? I held his gaze. Because I know the difference between coincidence and collusion. That's when the blood drained from his face. He understood now, not just what I knew, but how I'd come to know it. This wasn't an emotional ambush from a scorned husband. This was a surgical strike. An auditor's revenge. All data. No mercy. You can't prove intent, he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. I smiled again. Alan, I don't have to. You're a C-level exec with sloppy compliance controls and a personal connection to a beneficiary in an open trust. The hint of impropriety is enough to trigger an external audit. You know that. And so does your board. He stared at me like a man looking into the eye of a quiet storm. Why now, he asked. Because I was tired of being polite, I said. From the corner, Claire glanced toward us suspiciously. I made no effort to hide the box now. Alan, to his credit, slid it into his coat pocket like it was a wedding ring he didn't want seen. He looked around the room, then back at me. You're risking a lot by weaponizing this, he muttered. No, I said calmly. I'm reclaiming what you mistook for weakness. He swallowed hard and stepped back. I returned to the coffee table and picked up the folder I'd laid down earlier. Flipped it open. Section 5.3. There it was. A clause my wife had skimmed right past every time she saw it. Spousal misrepresentation impacting fiduciary assets. It wasn't just a trust clause. It was an eject button. They just handed me the case file. And I just handed him the detonator. It started with a scallop risotto. I remember because she hated seafood. Claimed it made her skin itch. But there it was, on a corporate receipt from a place called Armand's, an overpriced downtown bistro with $7 flatware and a reputation for hiring waiters who double as Instagram influencers. $248.39. Client dinner, it said. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, 2 desserts. Signed off by Alan. The same Alan now pretending he didn't recognize the name of the flash drive I gave him. What made it memorable wasn't just the bill. It was the date, September 17th. The night she told me she was attending a charity auction for youth literacy. Even showed me the flyer. Printed. Glossy. I remember she wore a deep green dress that night. Said it was appropriate for the cause. I didn't argue. Just said, you look nice, and poured myself a drink. She left early. Came home late. No photos from the event. No donation confirmation. Just tired eyes and a vague story about bad chicken skewers and a weird ventriloquist that made the room uncomfortable. The next day, I opened the company portal out of habit. I wasn't even looking for her. Just running a post-quarter audit sweep. Old reflexes. And there it was, her boss's signature on the reimbursement, logged at 11:14 p.m., timestamped to the exact night she was allegedly sipping mocktails with librarians. I showed her. Didn't accuse. Just asked. Funny, I said, holding the printout. Alan had dinner with a client the same night you were at the fundraiser. At Armand's. She barely looked up from her phone. Oh, that was me. Work stuff. You wouldn't understand. Work stuff. Like marriage wasn't work. Like being married to someone who quietly monitors tax discrepancies for a living was a detail she forgot. I didn't push. Not that night. Not the next. But something settled in me. A quiet pivot. I'd been cataloging her remarks for years. The comments. The slights. But this was different. This was patterned. This was the kind of thing I'd seen buried deep in spreadsheets, cloaked under vendor expenses and consulting fees. I'd built an entire career unraveling this kind of thing. So, I started documenting, not emotions, but data. Every reimbursement she filed under Alan's name, I printed. Every time she claimed to be somewhere, and I found conflicting records, I logged it. Cross-referenced with email headers. Phone GPS metadata. Keycard logs. Yes, I had access. You'd be amazed what old friends and facilities are willing to share over a drink and the right favor returned. I kept it all in a folder labeled QTR 4_projection. No one ever opened it. You think it's paranoia? No. Paranoia is guessing. I confirmed. One night, she came home buzzing from what she called a breakthrough strategy session. It was 1:38 a.m. She was flushed, distracted, and still wearing heels. She reeked of champagne and lavender hand soap. Not her usual. Her words slurred only slightly, but enough to betray that the strategy session was horizontal. I helped her to bed, covered her with the quilt she said my mother picked out to match nothing, sat in my chair, and opened the spreadsheet. New entry. Line 46. Expense. Room service, client meeting. Date. Same night. Time. 12:12 a.m. Location. Carmine Suites. Amount. $93.84. They really couldn't help themselves with the room service. The next day, I emailed Alan's assistant asking for an updated quarterly report for my records. Got it within the hour. Buried on page 6 was a cross-reference for that expense, again, under Executive Hospitality. I printed it, added it to the file. Then I printed a second copy, sealed that one in an envelope, wrote our daughter's name on it, because she was 16 then, and already asking questions. Why do you and Mom sleep in different rooms when you're not traveling? I told her I snored. She didn't buy it, and I didn't want her finding out the truth by accident. Not later. Not when she was already broken. So I gave her the envelope. Told her, don't open this unless things get confusing, or unless someone tries to rewrite the story. She nodded like she understood, but I saw the confusion in her eyes. The hope that it wouldn't matter. It always matters. Lies are like mold. They spread in the dark, and no one wants to touch them until everything smells like rot. My wife thought she was clever. Alan thought he was untouchable. They'd been playing corporate chess with a man who used to audit people's retirement plans for fun. Every smile I gave them was a ledger entry. Every nod was a receipt. This wasn't a reaction. It was a reconciliation. By the time I sat back down in the room, the air was heavier, denser, like something unspoken had just started breathing in the corners. You know that weight. You felt it at funerals, just before someone loses composure. The collective inhale, the bracing silence, the dread that whatever comes next can't be unsaid. I clicked my pen once more and signed the final page. Deliberate. Slow. No drama. Then I closed the binder and slid it gently across the table. No flourish. No smugness. Just a clean handoff, like one might deliver a lab result that's already been confirmed twice. My wife's fingers hesitated over the edge of the folder like it might sting. She opened it, skimmed quickly, too quickly, and then narrowed her eyes. Her lips parted, the color draining just slightly. This version doesn't, she murmured. Jake, this version doesn't include the addendum on deferred distribution, or the revised real estate carve-outs. It's missing sections. She looked up, and for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't angry. She was unsure. Gregson, her lawyer, stepped forward, brow furrowed. He reached for the folder, scanning the document like he expected to find a hidden trapdoor that would pop out and say, just kidding. Instead, he found a date. One that predates every conversation they thought they had control over. This isn't the draft we received, he said, voice thinning. Then, almost involuntarily, he checked his watch. That moment, that little glance down, it was reflexive. It meant he was behind on something. That something was already in motion. He knew. He looked back up at me, more carefully now. Like I'd just revealed, I wasn't the beige husband with matching socks, but the man who had quietly pulled the trigger 5 minutes before they walked into the room. Jake, Gregson asked slowly, where did you file this version? I didn't raise my voice. State Compliance Board, I said calmly. 2 weeks ago, with supplemental documentation under marital fiduciary breach and unauthorized asset allocation. Silence. He blinked. I'm sorry, under what grounds? Spousal benefit fraud, I repeated, folding my hands in my lap. Section 47B. Same clause her company cites in their executive policy manual. I assumed Alan would be familiar. Alan stiffened visibly, then glanced sideways, pretending not to listen. Gregson turned a deeper shade of something between pale and panic. Jake, that clause applies to intentional misrepresentation of financial disclosures. I know, I said, and that's why I filed it. Her signature appears on several asset documents that contain values inconsistent with those reported in her annual spousal income summary. That's not just a clerical error. That's perjury, if tested. My wife stood up now, fast. What the hell is this? You went behind my back. I stayed seated. Calm. No. I went through the proper channels. You went behind our back. There's a difference. Gregson stepped away from the table. His voice dropped low, but I heard every word. I need to call my office. No calls, I said. He stopped. Excuse me. No calls, I repeated. I submitted all relevant documentation under sealed review. Your firm is listed as having prior contact with an involved party. Until that's cleared, any legal communication could be interpreted as tampering. I'm sure you understand. That's when the sweat started. Literal. He put his phone down. Claire, my wife's sister, looked up from her tablet like someone just hit her with a bucket of ice water. What does that mean? She asked no one in particular. It means, I said, if anyone here tries to clarify the facts now, it may be interpreted as obstruction, especially if the benefit in question affects anyone's taxable distributions. And Claire, you might want to check the titling on that lake house again. She sat down without another word. Gregson was blinking rapidly now, like his brain couldn't quite load the data. You filed a fraud report against your own wife? He finally asked, stunned. I looked at him flatly. No, I submitted a request for audit. The fraud part is for them to determine. I simply handed over the documents. And the inconsistencies. And the drives, Alan muttered, barely audible. I turned to him. Oh, don't worry, Alan. You're listed as a secondary beneficiary in one of the filings. That alone creates a liability cascade. HR will want to talk. Probably tonight. He ran a hand through his hair and looked at the wine glass he hadn't touched. Jesus Christ, he muttered. My wife was pacing now, shoes clicking across the hardwood like a warning metronome. This wasn't supposed to be. This is insane. You waited 2 years just to blow everything up? No, I said. I waited 2 years because I wanted to see how far you'd go. Turns out, all the way. And still, I hadn't raised my voice. Gregson finally sat down, suddenly more concerned about his own liability than hers. Because now, the room didn't smell like wine or roast ham anymore. It smelled like smoke. And I hadn't even lit the match yet. The first buzz came while I was unfolding the second page of the trust clause, just as Claire began whispering something frantic to my wife. Her eyes were wide now, the kind of wide that happens when someone realizes the ship is leaking and on fire. She was gripping her phone like a life raft, tapping it over and over again like a notification might save her. Buzz. Alan ignored it. Buzz. He twitched slightly, pulled his phone halfway out of his pocket, glanced at the screen. Buzz. This time he answered. Alan here, he said, voice low, trying to keep the room from catching on. But it was too late. I was already watching him. So was Gregson. So was my wife. We heard a voice on the other end, muffled, but urgent. Then came the words. Not loud, but loud enough. Sir, we just got served. Alan's face froze. Who? He whispered, still trying to keep the panic from climbing out of his throat. A crackle. Then, external auditors. From the board. They have full credentials. And they brought internal access logs. From. A pause. Even the voice on the other end seemed to hesitate. From your wife's husband. That's when the last remaining color drained from Alan's face. He didn't respond. Didn't blink. Just slowly turned his head toward me like I'd quietly pulled out a pistol and aimed it at the base of his skull. He looked at me, not with anger, not with fear, with comprehension. The slow, dawning horror of a man who just realized his playbook had been lifted, page by page, and weaponized against him. I didn't say a word. Didn't have to, because it wasn't just his phone that was buzzing. Gregson's started vibrating next. Then Claire's. Then Sharp's, from his briefcase, where he'd clearly thought he could ride this out in silence. Only one phone in that room didn't buzz. Mine. Because I already knew what was coming. Gregson finally glanced at his screen, squinting like the message might rearrange itself if he stared long enough. Then he muttered, Oh no. Alan ended the call. Still pale. Still looking at me. What did you do? He asked, the words coming slow and strained. I tapped the binder gently. They're just following the paper trail, Alan. You taught me that, remember? Always track the approvals. Always note the timestamps. You told me that back in 2012, when we were both at the compliance conference in Miami. The one where you said, the audit's only scary if you're hiding something. He swallowed. Jake, they don't have the authority. They do. I cut in, finally speaking loud enough for the room to stop pretending they weren't eavesdropping. It's a secondary review triggered by a conflict of interest clause. You listed my wife as a consulting asset on 3 projects. I had my friend at the board flag the entries for review last quarter. They scheduled the audit last week. Gregson was flipping through the trust folder now like it might sprout a last-minute loophole. Jesus, he said under his breath. You timed this. I planned this, I corrected. My wife had backed into a corner near the fireplace, arms crossed, lips pressed so tightly they looked bloodless. Her posture was pure fury, but her eyes betrayed the fear. She'd always been a good liar. But she forgot that in numbers, there are no lies. Only evidence and interpretation. And interpretation was no longer her domain. Alan staggered backward and dropped into the armchair like he'd just lost altitude mid-flight. You didn't just go after her, he said, barely audible. You went after the infrastructure. You brought her into it, I said. The second you used your position to blur the lines between personal and professional, you made her your liability. I just turned on the light. Gregson's voice cracked. Jake, this could ruin multiple people. I stared at him. Good. Another buzz. This time it was Alan's phone again. He didn't answer. He didn't move. Because when you audit the fraud doesn't scream. It collapses. Quietly. And completely. At first, I thought she was crying because she was caught in the middle. That's what children do when the walls start caving in and they don't know which parent is holding the sledgehammer. She looked so small on those stairs, even at 18. Still in her oversized hoodie, sleeves pulled over her palms, hair unbrushed like she'd been dragged into the theater of this farce before she'd even had breakfast. She didn't speak when I walked in that day, just stared at me like she'd seen a ghost she wasn't supposed to believe in anymore. Then she ran upstairs. Not out of anger. Not fear. Something else. Something I didn't recognize right away. It wasn't until hours later, after the signing, after Alan sat down like a dying animal, after Claire started texting her husband with a face like someone who just found out the yacht isn't actually in her name, that I felt her hand on my arm. We were in the hallway. The others were still shouting, still scrambling, still pretending they could fix a house with no foundation. She tugged my sleeve gently. I turned. Her eyes were red but dry now, her voice barely above a whisper. Can I talk to you? I nodded and followed her into the mudroom. We sat on the little bench where we used to put on her snow boots when she was 4. The same one my wife insisted was too small to be useful, but I kept anyway. Some things are worth keeping. She looked down at her phone, thumb hovering over the lock screen. She told me. She started, then stopped. Her lip quivered. She told me you gave up, that you wanted out of the family, that you were tired, that you were willing to sign it all over just to be free. I didn't say anything. Let the lie hang there, ugly and weightless. She blinked hard. But then I saw the video. My heart slowed. She looked up at me. The one you left on my phone last week. Hidden in that folder marked Photos, Florida. It wasn't photos. Oh, so she'd found it. I nodded once. I hoped you would. I wasn't supposed to, right? I mean, not yet. No, but I had to be sure. In case today got rewritten. She swallowed. It's you. On your computer. Going through everything. The spreadsheets. The voice memos. You explained everything. And then, the clip. My throat tightened, just a little. The hotel footage? She nodded. Mom walking into the suite. Alan signing the room service receipt. The timestamp matched the night she told me you were out of town. She said you'd left because you couldn't handle holidays anymore. I didn't move. I let her keep going. You said in the video that you weren't angry, that you were sad, and that you weren't going to scream or explode because I didn't deserve that. Her voice cracked. And you said you were still my dad no matter what happened next. Even if Mom tried to make me believe otherwise. That broke me more than anything the others had tried. Because in all the planning, all the calm executions, all the slow-motion destruction I'd orchestrated, I'd almost forgotten that some truths need to be told directly. Not argued. Not proven. Just offered. I reached over and gently took her hand. I never wanted you to see any of this, I said. But I couldn't risk you growing up with a version of me that never existed. I know, she whispered. We sat there for a long time, just breathing in the quiet. You're not like her, I finally said. I know, she repeated. Firmer this time. She looked at the door behind us. Voices still leaking through the hallway. Alan's sharp, cracked tone. My wife's measured venom failing to land. Claire's indignation turning on itself. It was all falling apart, and none of them even knew how to be without the performance. I hate how she talks about you, my daughter said suddenly. Like you're just a man who writes checks. I smiled faintly. Well, to be fair, I did write a lot of checks. Yeah, but, she looked down. You also showed up, even when she didn't want you to. And there it was. Not revenge. Not even vindication. But something better. Recognition. Truth. And maybe, someday, healing. I squeezed her hand once before standing. You'll be okay, I said. She nodded. I don't want to go back out there, she admitted. You don't have to, I said. They already lost the only thing that mattered. She didn't ask what that was. She already knew. And so did I. The room was fractured by then. Voices overlapping like static. No one finishing sentences, just bleeding panic. Claire was barking at Gregson about fiduciary sabotage. My wife was pacing again, barefoot now, heels abandoned somewhere near the entryway, her mascara smudged, mouth running but making less and less sense with every syllable. She was throwing around words like malicious intent and fabricated timelines, as if sheer volume could reverse timestamps or erase Alan's name from the audit trail. But Alan, he hadn't spoken in a while. He just sat in that same armchair, hunched forward, phone in one hand, palm against his temple, like he could squeeze the truth out of his own skull if he pressed hard enough. The flash drives I gave him were still in his coat pocket, but by now, I think he knew what was on them without ever plugging them in. And then, as if summoned by the weight of his silence, his phone pinged again. Not a call this time. A message. Short, brutal, corporate. He unlocked the screen and read it. One line at first, then another, and then his lips parted, just slightly, like a man who'd just seen his own obituary printed with tomorrow's date. I watched him tilt the phone just enough for the room's light to catch the screen. Not for us to see, just for me. Because that message wasn't for all of them. It was meant for me. Contract suspended. He read softly, eyes locked on the display. All investigations tied to Jake's disclosure. Do not speak publicly. He blinked. Twice. Then slowly turned to face me. His voice was hoarse. Fragile. Like he hadn't spoken in 100 years. What did you do? He whispered. The whole room fell still. Gregson stopped mid-sentence. Claire's tablet clattered as it slid off the arm of the couch and hit the floor. Even my wife stopped pacing. I stood there, hands folded, the firelight flickering across the documents still spread across the coffee table, the signed pages, the trust folder, the untouched glass of wine she'd poured like it was communion for a life she never planned to honor. I took a breath, looked at Alan, and I said it quietly. No anger, no glee, just finality. I checked the receipts. He stared at me, not understanding, so I gave him the rest. I checked the receipts when your quarterly filings didn't match the reimbursement reports. When your calendar showed back-to-back client sessions in hotels with no client names listed. When her name appeared in 3 procurement memos and 2 speaker rosters, while she told me she was reorganizing the linen closet. When you made her a consulting asset without declaring the conflict of interest to your board. When the trust funds were redirected to cover her boutique's silent partner liabilities without her disclosing the change to me. I stepped closer, 1 pace only. You mistook silence for ignorance. But silence is just the audit before the report. Alan sank back into the chair, still holding his phone, still staring at the screen like it might explode. Claire whispered, "Is that real? They suspended his contract." Gregson didn't answer. He was too busy texting someone with shaking thumbs. My wife, finally out of words, just stood there blinking. No longer pacing. Just existing. A statue in the ruins she helped build. Alan whispered, barely audible now. "You've been planning this." "No," I said. "You've been writing this. I just proofread it." Then I walked over to the fire and picked up the single piece of paper that had fallen earlier, the one from her original folder, the document she expected me to sign today. I folded it in half, then in quarters, then eighths, and I set it in the fire. No one stopped me. No one dared. Because in that moment, the temperature in the room didn't come from the flames. It came from the realization that the man they'd cornered wasn't a pawn. He was the final audit. And the books had just closed. No one followed me. I stepped out of the front door into the winter dusk, the sky that kind of gray that doesn't snow or shine, just hangs like judgment. The porch was quiet. The sounds behind me, raised voices, whispered threats, panic tapping on screens, all faded into the kind of silence that follows a failed ambush. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. The final insult was how gently I left. No coat. No suitcase. I hadn't brought one. They thought I was walking into a trap, but they didn't realize I'd built the damn maze. As I passed the wrought iron gate, still decorated with the artificial pine wreath she hung each year like clockwork, because tradition matters, Jake, my phone buzzed. I didn't even flinch. I'd set it to send at that exact moment. The sender, my private account, one they didn't know existed, created under a different name, secured through a legal firm in another state. The kind of thing you build when you're planning something people shouldn't see until it's too late. I opened the message. Subject, termination confirmed. Sent to Alan's executive board, the internal legal counsel, HR. Attached files, timeline.pdf, audiologs.wave, taxcrossrefs.xlsx. Each one neatly compiled, time-stamped, corroborated, with annotations. The kind of package no executive can explain away, no PR department can sanitize. I didn't need to write an email body. The attachment spoke louder than anything I could say. I closed the gate behind me, the click of the latch more satisfying than it had any right to be. Behind me, the front door was still open. Inside, just as I crossed the street, I heard it. Alan's phone rang again. This time louder. Urgent. He answered it. I stopped walking. Didn't turn. Just stood there, watching my reflection in a neighbor's frosted car window. I heard his voice through the cold air. What? Wait. What? You have the files. A pause. You need me to. Wait. What do you mean internal hold? I didn't. He's lying. There's no. Another pause. No. No, I didn't. I didn't authorize that. He had to. Someone told him. Someone told him something. Silence. Then, like a bullet through glass. What did you tell him? His voice cracked. Hi. Broken. I imagined him turning to her. My wife. His co-conspirator. And I knew she wouldn't answer. Because the truth wasn't in her words anymore. It was in the files. In the signed clauses. In the frozen accounts. In the clause from Section 4C of the trust agreement. Any attempt to misappropriate assets through extramarital influence will trigger immediate reassignment of full legal control to the primary grantor. She'd call me a relic. A placeholder. A man who wore sad sweaters and paid sad bills. And now, she was staring at the ruins of everything she thought she'd rebuilt without me. Not just a failed ambush. Not just a botched divorce play. No, this was extinction. Their plan had a beginning and an end. Mine had layers. I didn't need to yell, or hit, or scream. I just needed to remember who I was. The man behind the curtain. The ghost in the audit trail. The signature they never noticed on the bottom of every document they ignored. So I kept walking. Down the street. Into the cold. Into the quiet. I had no bags. But I wasn't empty. I was done.